Number 5. Aliens on the Sun? In December 1995, the joint NASA-ESA Solar and Heliospheric Observatory Mission, or SOHO for short, was launched in an effort to study the Sun so that we could learn more about it. SOHO has allowed us to study the Sun inside out, helping us to learn about its internal structure, its extensive outer atmosphere, and the powerful solar winds that blow across our solar system. SOHO was integral in proving once and for all that the Sun does not in fact wear a giant pair of sunglasses, as has been implied by several children's art projects. SOHO captures images across several different spectrums of light, most of which are then made available for public consumption on the internet. Most of these images are pretty innocuous, but sometimes someone will see something that can't be explained, proving that sometimes staring at the Sun can be beneficial. A UFO enthusiast was looking at the photos of the Sun and noticed a black square of the photo cut out. At first, he thought it was a technical issue, until he looked into it more. Here's the story as he related it. On June 28th, I found what looked like a mistake in the photo, but looks more like a black cube that is in orbit around our Sun. Sure, one photo mistake, right? Wrong. NASA and SOHO have the most advanced telescopic equipment available. For a cube to be missing from the photo, either it was cut out by NASA to hide something, or is it a flying cube in orbit around the Sun? Crazy? I think not. How often do you look directly at the Sun? Never, because it will damage your eyes. So it would go unnoticed. However, scientists around the world have stated there are UFOs orbiting the Sun many times larger than the Earth. I have recorded 3 instances of this cube flying around in different positions this month. For a long time, it was assumed that these squares were simply a computer glitch, but 4 years later, the squares showed up in a photo again. But the idea that this was a technical issue was called into question when separate UFO enthusiasts came forward with photos from a different SOHO camera that showed the square in the same spot. Is there a cube-shaped UFO orbiting the Sun? Or is NASA editing out something from the photos before releasing them? If there is something there, what are they trying to accomplish by hiding it? Number 4. Neil Armstrong's alien encounter. On July 20th, 1969, history was made as the Apollo 11 lunar module landed on the Moon, allowing its crew members, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, to become the first humans to ever walk on the Moon. It was a landmark day for humanity, and Neil's first steps on the Moon were broadcast on television, where it was witnessed by over 650 million viewers. During his moonwalk, he had access to 2 radio channels. One that would let everything he said be broadcast both to television and mission control, and another that would allow him to speak only to mission control. At some point in the moonwalk, Armstrong switched over to his private channel. When asked in later years why he had switched to his private channel and what was said, Armstrong said, "I have no comment on that, and am uncomfortable discussing the topic in any further detail." During the time that the radio communication was unavailable to the public, several amateur ham radio enthusiasts managed to tune in to the private channel. The following quotes from the incident have been corroborated by hundreds of unrelated operators who were all tuned in at the time. I say that there were other spaceships. Those are giant things. No, 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 this is not an optical illusion. No one is going to believe this. They're here, under the surface. We saw some visitors. They were here for a while, observing the instruments. I say that there were other spaceships. They're lined up in the other side of the crater. My hands are shaking so badly, I can't do anything. Film it. God, if these cameras have picked up anything, what then? I didn't have any film at hand. 3 shots of the saucers, or whatever they were, that were ruining the film. They've landed here. There they are, and they're watching us. In the years since, this was denied by Armstrong and NASA, but Buzz Aldrin did say there was at one point an unknown object tracing their path to the Moon. Were some of the over 650 million beings watching the Moon landing visitors from another world? We may never know for sure. Number 3. NASA cutting the live feed. Another of NASA's crown jewels is the International Space Station, which, as the name suggests, was built with the collaboration of other countries in an effort to collect data and therefore raise our understanding of the universe and our place in it. The International Space Station broadcasts a live stream that anyone on the internet can watch. But sometimes the feed is lost. Sometimes this feed going down feels somewhat convenient. On July 9th, 2016, the live feed showed a bright glowing object falling into view of the camera. Just as the object is about to get into a more viewable position, the feed dropped, and a message came on screen claiming that technical issues had caused the feed to cut out. One YouTuber grabbed the footage and uploaded it. In the caption of the video, he states that it wasn't necessarily an alien craft and very well could have been a meteor, but the fact that the feed was cut just before the camera could broadcast a clear look was inherently suspicious. A spokesperson for NASA came forward, saying the feed being cut was not a deliberate act, explaining that the station regularly passes out of range of the tracking and data relay satellites used to send and receive video, and telemetry from the station. For video, whenever we lose signal, the cameras will show a blue screen or a preset video slate. This explanation, of course, did little to appease the people of the internet, who had already decided that the feed was cut in an intentional effort to prevent the regular people of Earth from learning about visitors from another planet. But as far as explanations from government agency goes, this is one of the better ones I've heard. Number 2. The MJ12 Documents. When John F. Kennedy was made President of the United States in 1960, he quickly developed a reputation of not being a fan of the intelligence community. He believed that certain information should be shared with the people they were governing, and perhaps even more surprisingly, felt that some information should be shared with their Soviet counterparts in the interest of developing a relationship and de-escalating the Cold War in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He apparently drafted and sent a memorandum in 1963, 2 weeks before his death, that requested that NASA initiate broader cooperation with the USSR in their outer space and lunar landing programs. Part of this document says that NASA would have to share classified UFO secrets with the Soviets. It has been claimed that the idea of sharing this information with an enemy state was the last straw for the intelligence community, all of whom apparently formed together to pool information and plans in a group called the Majestic 12, which was supposedly formed by President Truman in 1947 to deal with UFO activity. In documents that had apparently been saved from a fire known as the MJ12 Documents, it is stated that Kennedy has been making inquiries about the Majestic 12's activities that cannot be allowed. The document goes on to talk about how the issue should be handled, saying that when conditions become non-conducive for growth in our environment, and Washington cannot be influenced any further, the weather is lacking any precipitation, and it should be wet. Well, for a layman, this is more confusing than anything. It may be clear when you consider that wet work is a euphemism for assassination. It should of course be noted that official government agencies claim that these documents are forgeries, but it's not like an intelligence agency partially responsible for the death of a president is going to verify documents that supposedly implicate that same government agency. Was President Kennedy killed for trying to force NASA to share information of UFOs with the Soviet Union? If these documents are authentic, it would certainly seem to be the case. Number 1. The Apollo 8 confirmation. The original goal of the 1968 Apollo 8 mission was to be the first craft to leave low orbit and fly in an elliptical medium Earth orbit. JFK had challenged NASA to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and that deadline was fast approaching. So, in order to make the most of their opportunities, NASA made a bold call and decided that rather than settling for medium Earth orbit, they would instead quite literally shoot for the moon, which they would then orbit before returning home. Apollo 8 launched on December 21st, 1968, and reached the moon on Christmas Eve. Millions watched as astronauts Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders made their orbit of the moon. Despite NASA having a reputation for planning everything down to the minutiae, the plans for this broadcast were surprisingly loose. As Borman recalled, "We were told that on Christmas Eve we would have the largest audience that had ever listened to a human voice, and the only instructions that we got from NASA was to do something appropriate." The astronauts chose to take turns reading from the book of Genesis while their craft made 10 orbits around the moon. As Lovell later said, "The first 10 verses of Genesis is the foundation of many of the world's religions, not just the Christian religion. There are more people in other religions than the Christian religion around the world, and so this would be appropriate to that, and that's how it came to pass. With the more sentimental aspects of the broadcast complete and their mission a success, it was time for the astronauts to come home. Mission Control waited anxiously as Christmas Eve turned into Christmas Day to find out if the engine burn for the craft to leave their lunar orbit had worked. Word soon came from Jim Lovell confirming not only that the ship was on its way home, but something else as well. Lovell's radio communication stated, "Roger. Please be informed there is a Santa Claus." In all the hubbub concerning the first lunar orbit, this news seemed almost like an afterthought. But the fact that a NASA astronaut confirmed that not only is Santa real, but that he lives on the moon is astounding. NASA never followed up on this information publicly, but what else have they learned since then? Are the legendary elves really moon people? Is the workshop located on the dark side of the moon? This is yet another example of NASA giving us bites of information that raise more questions than they answer. Number 5. Music on the moon. In May of 1969, man had not yet set foot on the moon, and the United States and the Soviet Union were still locked in an expensive race to see who could get there first. Before the Apollo 11 mission could take Neil Armstrong to the moon's surface, where he could utter the famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," there was one more mission to complete. The crew of the Apollo 10's mission was to fly in orbit around the moon and launch its lunar module, which would go 15.6 kilometers above the moon's surface before returning to the main ship and returning to Earth. The mission was considered a dress rehearsal for the moon landing that would occur 2 months later in July of 1969. A last chance to iron out any kinks so that there would be no surprises on the big day. But the crew was in for a surprise no one saw coming. Music from another world. While the ship was making its orbit, it made its way over to the dark side of the moon. For an hour, the astronauts would be out of contact with Mission Control and would have to fend for themselves. Once out of contact with Earth, they began to hear strange whistling sounds coming in on their radio that they could not explain. The noise and their reactions to it were recorded, and once they were back in contact with Mission Control, they filled their superiors in on the situation. Many theories were offered as to the origin of these sounds, such as magnetic fields or atmospheric interference. But these theories were debunked, as not only does the moon not have a magnetic field, its atmosphere is too thin to carry sound. This bizarre occurrence didn't interfere with the mission, and it was considered a success, which led to the Apollo 11 mission achieving the impossible and putting men on the moon. But the tale of this cosmic whistling was classified, and no one on Earth knew about the mysterious space music until decades later, when NASA's archives were declassified and made available for public access. What was this strange music? Was it simply malfunctioning equipment? Or was it a symphonic congratulations from the other species of the universe, welcoming humanity to the stars? We may never know. Number 4. The Black Knight. This next story takes us through time, from the late 1800s all the way to the late 1990s, giving more than a century of lore to this supposed satellite from an alien world. In 1899, the famous inventor and physicist Nikola Tesla was conducting experiments with radio. During one of his tests, he claimed to hear a strange transmission that he believed was coming not from Earth, but from outer space. If this is true, it means that not only is Tesla the namesake for a line of self-immolating electric cars, he is also responsible for making first contact with alien life through an orbiting alien probe that had remained undetected by humanity for thousands of years. A similar story came to light in the late 1920s, when the radio engineer Jörgen Hulse also claimed to have picked up a strange transmission that had echoed back to him after a delay. These long-delayed echoes, as they were later named, still do not have an official explanation, but many theorize that they originate from the same supposed satellite as the ones detected by Tesla years before. Similar stories began to crop up from multiple sources, including a science fiction author by the name of Duncan Lunin, who claimed to have decoded messages from the Black Knight satellite, which had revealed the existence of an alien race in the Epsilon Boötis, a binary star system in the Boötis constellation. In 1954, a UFO researcher claimed that the United States Air Force had reported that they had evidence of 2 satellites orbiting the Earth, an unusual claim since no country had yet come up with the technology necessary to launch a satellite. In 1963, an astronaut named Gordon Cooper reportedly called in a UFO sighting while making his 15th orbit during the Mercury Atlas 9 space mission. However, this incident is notably missing from the official NASA mission log. The seemingly biggest boon of evidence came to light in 1998 during the STS-88 mission to the still under construction International Space Station, where the first US module was delivered to the ISS, making it an important mission in the history of space exploration. During the construction, one of the astronauts saw something unusual floating above the Earth and managed to snap a picture of it. This photo was latched onto by believers in the Black Knight satellite as proof of its existence. But as they often do, NASA decided to be no fun at all and crap in everyone's oatmeal. NASA claimed that the photo most likely showed simple debris. Space journalist James Oberg, a man with possibly the coolest sounding job title ever, theorized that it was a thermal blanket that had been confirmed lost by the mission that had made its way into the atmosphere and gotten tangled up into a strange shape before eventually burning up. Is there a satellite of alien origin orbiting the Earth that NASA doesn't want us to know about? Or are all these stories merely a combination of technical issues and enthusiastic theorists? Perhaps this is something to debate in the comments below. Number 3. The Brookings Report. In the year 1960, NASA's Committee on Long-Range Studies partnered with the Brookings Institute to create a report for the House Committee on Science and Astronautics titled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. Not surprisingly, when talked about in general conversations between UFO and alien believers, it is referred to instead as the Brookings Report. This section theorizes about how the public would react to the discovery of alien life and how it would affect society, and how the decision would have to be made on whether or not such a discovery would be made public. Some choice passages are as follows. Anthropological files contain many examples of societies, sure of their place in the universe, which have disintegrated when they have had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies, espousing different ideas in different lifeways. Others that survived such an experience usually did so by paying the price of changes in values and attitudes and behaviors. Studies might help to provide programs for meeting and adjusting to the implications of such a discovery. Questions one might wish to answer by such studies would include: how might such information, under what circumstances, be presented to or withheld from the public, for what ends? What might be the role of the discovering scientists and other decision makers regarding the release of the fact of discovery? While it is important to note that the report does not state whether the government should or should not cover up the existence of alien life, should it be discovered, it does state that this is a choice that would have to be made. This report was developed relatively early in the history of space exploration and was presented to policymakers, so we do know that people in charge of government policy were presented with a document that floated the idea of hiding the discovery of alien life from the people of Earth. I don't think the writers of the report were trying to hide anything, but the fact that a report featuring a section on what courses of action should be taken if hypothetically alien life were discovered makes me wonder if this was actually just a way to get the answers they needed without revealing the true implications of the report to the writers. Number 2. Why is NASA altering photos? NASA has a program called Picture of the Day where, predictably, they post a photo from their various rovers and satellites onto the internet every day for public consumption. One day in late 2014, the photo they posted was a picture taken by NASA's Cassini orbiter of Saturn's moons, Dione and Titan. It is a stunning photograph, but one internet commenter found something he did not expect when he downloaded and adjusted the photo. While adjusting the contrast and brightness of the photo, he found that it revealed a huge object behind one of the moons that was giving off a rainbow-like aura. Even more disturbing, he saw the photo had been altered with black markings covering whatever it was behind the moon, proving that NASA had altered the photo before posting it. He took his claims online where they started receiving some attention, but before long he received a comment from someone he was not expecting. The person who had edited the original photo. A NASA employee who explained that the photo was not edited to try and hide any alien craft, but to make up for the technical limitations of the Cassini orbiter as it photographed the two moons. As she explained it, Cassini takes color photos by snapping 3 sequential photos through red, green, and blue filters. In the time that separated the three frames, Dione moved, so if I did a simple color composite, I would be able to make Titan look right, but not Dione, or Dione look right, but not Titan. So, I aligned Dione, cut it out, then aligned Titan, and then had to account for the missing bits of shadow where the bits of Dione had been in the 2 of the 3 channels. While this does seem to be a plausible explanation as to why the photo was edited, the original poster remained skeptical. He believed it was possible that NASA had ordered the photo altered before posting it, and then released the explanation once they were caught. Of course, one could argue that if NASA had taken a photo that featured a UFO, and they didn't want the public to know about it, they could have just not posted the photo at all, rather than trying to Photoshop it out and hoping that no one noticed. Number 1. What is NASA hiding at the North Pole? In 2016, a researcher came forward claiming to have proof that NASA was trying to cover up something at the North Pole. He provided older satellite images that seemed to show some kind of crater or hole at the top of the Earth. He believed that this was evidence that supported the hollow Earth theory. The hollow Earth theory claims that underneath the surface of the Earth is more land, as well as a central sun located in the center of the Earth. The claimant says that these photos of a hole at the top of the Earth, first seen in satellite photos from 1968, may not be definitive proof that the Earth is hollow, but the hole's omission from subsequent satellite photos does prove that there is some kind of entrance at the pole that NASA is trying to hide. Many explorers have tried to reach this area hoping to prove the theory's validity, but many of them did not survive the journey, and those who did came back with stories that simply cannot be taken seriously. One group claimed that the hole was real, and that once they managed to lower themselves into it, inhabited by a small race of creatures. The explorers kept their distance but reported seeing some kind of factory in the distance that seemed to be running all throughout the day and night. Stranger still were the emissions being generated by the factory, as whatever was fueling it was giving off a smell not dissimilar to ginger. Not wanting to push their luck, the explorers took photos and came back the way they came, but when they checked their cameras, they found that some kind of magnetic interference from the pole had wiped their camera's memory cards. They came forward with these claims, and NASA firmly denied that their claims had any validity, saying that the explorers were simply mad or looking for attention. However, another government agency, NORAD, has been more forthcoming about what is happening at the North Pole, and released a report stating that it is a consistent site of UFO activity. Every year around the winter solstice, they've reported a small flying craft exiting the North Pole and traveling around the world at super speeds, seeming to visit every country on Earth in just one night, before returning to the pole and not being seen again until the next year. What is this strange craft? Is it traveling around the Earth in order to spy on its people? Is it friend or foe? What is the purpose of the bright red light shining at the head of the craft? Is it connected to the explorers' stories? And if so, why has NASA not come forward to us with information? Number 5. The Pentagon Accusation. When the subject of aliens or UFOs comes up with the government officials, they are often dismissed with a joke about how the only people who believe in such things are crazy conspiracy theorists. But every once in a while, a government employee will come forward and make claims that such theories are not as crazy as the government would have you believe. Luis Elizondo is one such man. Luis was the head of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program from 2010 until 2017, where he apparently had access to the Pentagon's data on UFOs and had to interview military eyewitnesses of UFO phenomena on a near daily basis. He claims that he spent much of his time at the Pentagon trying to get his program to be taken seriously, but that he was suppressed by other branches of the government, such as NASA, for fears that news of alien visitors would incite mass panic. Other government personnel who tried to keep him quiet apparently did so out of religious reasons, with one claiming that he should stop pursuing UFOs and instead read his Bible, as such craft were probably demons. Elizondo has described seeing footage of crafts that have been able to reach speeds of up to 11,000 miles per hour, while still being able to make seemingly impossible, instant 90-degree turns. Other craft have apparently been capable of flight with no visible means of propulsion, meaning that whoever is piloting these crafts is in possession possession of technology generations more advanced than any currently found on Earth. Luis left his position in 2017 in frustration at the refusal of the various branches of government to brief officials or the public on the multitude of UFO sightings they have collected over the years, and the government has tried to discredit him by saying that he had no assigned responsibilities for the AATIP. This was challenged when former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid released a statement that Elizondo was indeed in a leadership role in the AATIP program. The fact that the government is working so hard to discredit someone who is trying to inform the public about a matter of public importance is disturbing, but unfortunately not surprising. Number 4. The hacker's discovery. In 2002, a Scottish systems administrator and hacker named Gary McKinnon perpetrated the biggest military computer hack of all time by hacking into 97 NASA and US military computers over the span of 13 months. He claimed that the reason for this behavior was to search for evidence of free energy suppression and any other potential cover-ups by NASA of UFOs or technologies that could be useful to the public. Once caught and arrested, there was a lengthy court case to determine whether or not he should be extradited to the United States to serve his sentence. The news focused mainly on the crime and the subsequent court case, so much so that not many people looked into whether or not he found any evidence of what he was looking for, but according to McKinnon, he did. While looking through NASA's computers, he claims that he came across a document titled Non-Terrestrial Officers. He looked at the document and found an Excel sheet containing the ranks and names of several unknown individuals and a sheet with tabs for material transfers between ships. He then searched records for ships with the corresponding names and found nothing, leading him to believe that the ships were part of a covert non-terrestrial initiative. After a lengthy court case, the United Kingdom decided not to extradite him to the United States, claiming that the crime was committed due to mental illness, and that sending him away would be a violation of his human rights. Is this really the case? Or did he find something in those computers that he was able to trade to the United Kingdom's government in order to avoid being shipped abroad? Number 3. The Challenger Accusation. On January 28, 1986, NASA launched the Space Shuttle Challenger. It had 7 people on board, 6 astronauts and 1 teacher, who had been selected to be a part of the mission as part of NASA's Teacher in Space program. Their mission was to study Halley's Comet as it passed near the Sun and to deploy a tracking and data relay satellite. Due to the novelty of a teacher in space, millions of school children were watching the launch in class when it occurred at 11:39 a.m. Tragically, 73 seconds into the shuttle's launch, Challenger broke apart and all 7 passengers were lost. President Ronald Reagan created the Rogers Commission to investigate the incident. It was discovered that the cause of the accident was the rubber O-rings, which were supposed to act as a seal in the shuttle's solid rocket boosters, but had stiffened due to the cold of the day, causing them to be less effective in causing the pressurized gas to leak and burn through an attachment strut and the external propellant tank. The combined stress caused the shuttle to be torn apart. The investigation also found a few more details that caused some scandal for NASA. It was discovered that concerns about the O-rings had been raised by NASA engineers since the early 70s, but that NASA had deemed the component acceptable despite the engineers' protests and suggestions that further reinforcement be given to the rings. In 1980, the NASA Verification Committee requested further tests on the joints the rings were reinforcing to test how they would behave at different temperatures. A test that would have exposed the Challenger's fatal flaw, but the program managers decided that such tests were unnecessary. It turned out that other missions in the years between the request for more tests and the Challenger mission had had problems with the O-rings, with them showing signs of erosion or letting in soot, showing that they were not providing a reliable seal. NASA also claimed that all passengers had met their end instantly and without pain, but it was discovered that the astronauts had discovered their emergency breathing packs, showing that they were alive and trying to survive well after the initial explosion. A member of the commission, Robert B. Hotz, went so far as to accuse NASA of a cover-up in both the Miami Herald and the New York Times, saying that their initial statements about the astronauts and other actions by the space agency were part of a broad effort to keep the public from learning that the Challenger crew members might have survived the disaster if certain precautions had been taken. NASA denied such an effort, but as a result of the commission, NASA had to establish the Office of Safety, Reliability, and Quality Assurance to ensure that future missions did not neglect the safety of their crew in such a fatal way. Number 2. Life on Mars. One of the most common accusations against NASA is that they are covering up evidence of alien life on on other planets, specifically Mars. While there are too many of these accusations to dive into in great detail, we will be looking at two in particular. Richard Hoagland is one of the many people convinced that there is evidence of ancient civilizations on Mars due to NASA photographs that were taken during the 1976 Viking 1 orbit. These photos show what has been dubbed by believers as the Mars face, a large sphinx-like object. In 1998, the Mars Global Surveyor sent photos of Mars's surface back to Earth, showing only a pile of rocks, noticeably lacking the iconic profile, claiming that it debunked the theory. Hoagland called this a load of baloney, and unearthed a NASA-commissioned report from 1960 recommending that any future discoveries of alien life be kept from the public so as to not disturb the evolutionary flow of the 20th century civilization. Nearly 20 years later, a researcher named Barry DeGregorio, who specializes in the study of microscopic life in Earth's soil, looked at photos released by NASA, and realizing how similar shapes and patterns in the photos were to Ordovician trace fossils he has photographed on Earth, claimed that the Mars pictures appeared to feature trace fossils made by soft-bodied life forms. NASA claims that the shapes are merely rock crystals which are being analyzed. The researcher claims that this is a cover-up, and that he is planning on releasing a report that will blow the lid off of the cover-up. He theorizes that NASA is covering the findings up to avoid jeopardizing their planned 2030 Mars mission. It is hard to say if Mars is or ever was populated by an alien race, but if they were, would NASA tell us if they found evidence once they got there? Number 1. The Astronaut Accusation. One of the leading causes of people who claim to believe in aliens and UFOs not being taken seriously is a perceived lack of credibility. If someone reports seeing a UFO, many people immediately assume that the person either saw an airplane from a weird angle, is lying, or is insane. Which is part of why it is so exciting when someone with a staggering amount of credibility comes out in support of the idea of alien life. Edgar Mitchell is one such person. Not only does he have 2 Bachelor of Science degrees as well as a doctorate in aeronautics from MIT, but he is also a former NASA astronaut who was the 6th man in history to walk on the moon as part of the 1971 Apollo 14 mission. In fact, he is tied with fellow astronaut Alan Shepard for the record of the longest moonwalk in history, having tread its surface for over 9 hours straight during his mission. Mitchell has not said how he knows this for sure, but he said in an interview in 2008, when asked about his opinion on alien life, that, yes, there's not much question at all that there is life throughout the universe. I'm totally sure we are not alone. He went on to claim that he had intelligence that proved, quote, that we have been visited on this planet and the UFO phenomenon is real, though it's been covered up by governments for the last 60 years or so. In other interviews, Mitchell has confirmed the 1947 Roswell incident and has described aliens as harmless little people. When asked about the former astronaut's comments, NASA curtly replied, quote, NASA does not track UFOs. Dr. Mitchell is a great American, but we do not share his opinion on this issue. Number 5. The NASA Photoshop cover-up. The most recent of the incidents on this list is the accusation from prominent UFO hunter Scott C. Waring that NASA is editing archival photos to remove alien craft in an effort to hide the existence of extraterrestrials from the people of Earth. As evidence of this, he posted a photo from the 1968 Apollo 7 mission that he claims shows a UFO on his blog, saying that the craft he saw in 2013 had been edited out of the photo by 2015. As he himself put it, guys, I discovered this UFO back in 2013 and NASA used my website to edit it out by 2015. Now I have found them in the US National Archives. They have accidentally saved the original Apollo 7 photo with the UFO in it. The photo in question shows a black object seemingly floating below the Apollo 7 spacecraft and above the planet. The supposedly edited photo does not show the small black object. Waring expressed his concerns in the following quote, "This is 100% proof that NASA used my discoveries and used photo editing software to edit out the UFO and then add a lot of contrast to the original photo to cover up most of the detail. Then, to top it off, they no longer have the largest 5 megabyte size to download, but instead only have a tiny thumbnail of about 200 kilobytes in size. It's reduced reduced size and quality has destroyed its usefulness. NASA has to be stopped. This kind of cover-up is very corrupt and deceitful to not only the American public, but the world. Despite these claims, the black mark can be seen in other official versions of the photo, and according to analog film experts, they say it is likely just an imperfection in the photo negative. As they put it, irregular shaped dull marks or roundish spots on the surface of your film are likely to be drying marks, caused by the droplets of water forming in the film's surface during the drying stage. These marks are typically seen on the film backing. Films washed in hard water areas are more likely to see this problem. Is NASA really altering photos in their archives in order to cover up alien life? Possibly. Is this an example of them doing so? I'm not entirely convinced. Number 4. The Space Fireflies. During the race to the moon between the United States and the Soviet Union, one of the landmark moments of the race was the Mercury Atlas 6 mission, when American astronaut John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth. As important as this moment was in the history of space exploration, it is better remembered by UFO enthusiasts for what Glenn saw out of his window during the mission. While Glenn was flying over Australia in the Friendship 7 capsule, he looked out the window and saw what he later described as fireflies. Upon seeing this, he radioed the following back to NASA Mission Control: "I am in a big mass of some very small particles that are brilliantly lit up like they're luminescent. They look like little stars." Glenn then tapped on the window, and the fireflies seemed to react and flew away. NASA was of course worried that this was parts of the capsule heat shield collapsing, but thankfully for Glenn, this was not the case. Because the mission wasn't being broadcast live, the firefly story didn't get much media attention, being somewhat of an urban legend. However, when the next American in space, Scott Carpenter, also reported seeing the luminescent particles, NASA had an excuse at the ready, saying that it was caused by ice particles from the condensation of the ship's heat exchanger. While to most this would sound like a plausible explanation, John Glenn maintained until the day he died that what he saw could not be explained by ice particles. What did John Glenn see out his capsule window during the 1962 Mercury Atlas mission? Was it really ice particles? Or is NASA trying to hide the truth from the people of Earth? Was John Glenn right? Is it a coincidence that multiple James Bond films were also directed by a man named John Glenn? We may never know. Number 3. Shuttle Atlantis' close encounter. In an age of internet and live broadcasts, it is getting harder and harder to prevent information from reaching the public, with it usually being only a matter of time before secrets find their way out of the shadows and into the light. Such is the case in our next entry, which happened in 2006 during the STS-115 mission of the Shuttle Atlantis to aid in the construction of the International Space Station. The shuttle and its crew had successfully completed its mission and had almost completed the trip back to Earth when Mission Commander Brent Jett looked out the window and noticed, as he put it, some kind of reflective structure. He radioed Mission Control and told them what he saw, telling them that what he was looking at, quote, "didn't look like anything I've ever seen outside of this shuttle, that's for sure." NASA was worried that whatever the object was, it might be some crucial part of the craft that had broken off. They took control of the cameras that were broadcasting the mission to try and get a look at what Commander Jett had seen. To the shock of all the cameras, it saw 3 bright objects in the sky. The information was picked up by the media, and NASA scrambled to come up with a suitable explanation. They ordered an inspection of the craft to see if it was a broken off part of the ship as they had assumed, but could not find any evidence of damage. When the ship returned to Earth, another inspection was ordered, but once again, no damage other than a small micrometeor impact was found. NASA has never been able to explain what happened during this mission, and seem to have made no effort at all to solve the mystery in the years since. Or do they already know what happened, and simply do not want us to be in on the secret? As disturbing as that prospect may be, it would not surprise me to learn that it is the truth. Number 2. Gordon Cooper's alien adventures. Gordon Cooper is an important figure in the history of space travel, having served as an aerospace engineer, a test pilot, a pilot for the United States Air Force, and being the youngest of the 7 original Project Mercury astronauts. He was the first American to spend a day in space, the first to sleep in space, and was the last American to go on a solo orbital mission, and set the space endurance record when he traveled 3,312,993 miles in 190 hours in 56 minutes, thus proving that astronauts could survive in space for the length of time that would be required to travel to the moon and back. He was an extremely important historical figure, but unlike many other NASA astronauts, he was not shy about talking about the various experiences he had over the years with unidentified flying objects, and the government's effort to cover these experiences up. Gordon Cooper claimed that he had seen his first UFO while flying over West Germany in 1951, but that his first experience with government cover-ups came in 1957 while he was stationed at the Edwards Air Force Base in California. He had put a crew in charge of setting up an Ascania cinetheodolite, which is a photographic instrument used for collecting trajectory data of aircraft, missiles, rockets, and other similar equipment. The equipment was set up on a dry lake bed and set to take pictures at 30 frames per second as aircraft landed. The men later reported to Cooper that they had seen something odd and had captured images of a strange-looking saucer-like aircraft that hadn't made any sound while landing or taking off. The men were used to seeing experimental aircraft, but were unnerved at the sight of this saucer, which had hovered over them, landed about 50 yards away using 3 extended landing gears, but had taken off when they had approached for a closer look. Cooper called a special Pentagon number, which was meant for reporting such phenomena, and was told to have the film developed, to make no prints of it, and to send it to them in a locked courier pouch. However, as Cooper would later admit, they hadn't told him not to look at the negative before sending them out. He looked at them and saw incredibly high-quality images of the flying saucer. He had expected there to be a follow-up investigation, but never heard anything further. He tried to track down what happened to the images, but never found out, assuming that they ended up in the Air Force's Project Blue Book, which was the Air Force's official UFO investigation. He had to deal with more government concealment, this time from NASA, when he did his solo orbital mission in 1963. While being broadcast live on NBC, Cooper told Mission Control that he could see a glowing green object which was rapidly approaching his craft. The object was not an illusion and even showed up on radar, but when he returned to Earth, he was forbidden to talk about the experience any further with the press. The reporters brought in for the subsequent press conference for the mission were also told that they could not ask Cooper about the green orb either. Years later, Cooper would talk about this encounter more openly and discuss the fact that NASA and other government agencies were covering up several stories of UFO encounters. He even spoke to the United Nations on the subject, saying, "Authority is afraid that people may think of God knows what kind of horrible invaders. So the password still is, we have to avoid panic by all means." Did Gordon Cooper really see multiple UFOs during his life? And if so, did NASA and the Air Force prevent the public from learning about these visitors from another planet in an effort to avoid panic? Will there ever be a point in history where they trust the people of the world to be able to handle such news? Much like the identity of the flying saucer's pilots, it is unknown. Number 1. Did we even go to the moon? As we bring our video to a close, we must talk about one of the most popular NASA cover-up theories out there. While several people are convinced that NASA has come across evidence of alien life that they are keeping from us, or that they have even managed to make contact with extraterrestrials, there is still an inherent level of trust involved in those theories. The idea that NASA is covering up such evidence relies on the belief that NASA has really managed to send men to space. However, there are a significant number of people who don't even trust that this occurred, believing that man has never set foot on the moon. In the interest of fairness, let's explore this theory further. The gist of the theory is that while the United States and Russia were racing to see who could get to the moon first, the United States government built a set and filmed fake astronauts pretending to walk on the moon, broadcasting the footage across the world and effectively ending the space race in their favor. Some theories even say that famous director Stanley Kubrick was hired after the impressive special effects in his science fiction film 2001: A Space Odyssey caught the eye of the US government. He was apparently hired to direct the allegedly fake moon landing. The evidence that people have latched onto over the years include shadows in photos that don't line up how people think they should, claims that the astronauts could not survive the Earth's radiation field, the lack of stars in the moon landing photos, and the infamous American flag that they claim appears to be flapping in the wind despite the lack of wind on the moon. Most, if not all, of this evidence has been explained by NASA, but once someone is convinced that the moon landings are fake, no explanation from NASA is going to convince them. Whether the moon landing is real or not, it is a good example of how the public's trust in a government institution can erode to the point where some people feel like they can't even take the most basic bits of information provided by NASA for granted.
We're only 4 months into 2024 and the space news is already a-flowing. I know I've been a little quiet on the alien theories front lately, but I think it's time we ramp things up again to put the pressure back on NASA and all those governmental bodies around the world to release what they know for once and for all. Question for you. What do you think the government's been hiding this year? Let me know in the comments and let's see what I've sleuthed out. Alright, let's kick off today with the obvious, and remember those aliens that were spotted a couple of months ago? Yes, because if we didn't have enough craziness to worry about in 2024, may I offer you 10-foot tall creatures of the unknown? Here's the thing, anything over 7 feet tall is already terrifying to me personally. Ditto for aliens on their own, no matter what they look like. Combine the two, eat! My worst nightmare. We've got a video. Lucky us. It shows two human-like creatures on top of a hill at an island in Brazil, and it got a heck of a lot of traction on social media. According to a New York Post report, the beings were 10 foot tall and spotted at Ilha do Mel, an island more than 3 kilometers off the coast of southeast Brazil. It is a favorite spot for environmentally conscious travelers and beach lovers, and it's celebrated for its varied ecosystems. Spanning a simple little 5 kilometers in length, 800 meters in width, the island presents a scenic mosaic of natural marvels. So we've got one creature, and then we've got another one. The outlet's like, they're here, and their appearance on the hilltop, it caused a lot of chitter chatter. You can see the creatures. They stand confidently on top of the hill, which, according to locals, it's hard to get there, and the shrubbery barely reaches their knees. As you see them walk, you can see them swinging their arms in a human-like manner, but like not enough to convince anybody, you know what I mean? Now, when I watched the video, we've got a witness that was like, it's just too big to be a person. Look at the way he moves, it's really weird. Look at that, it's very fast. For me, it's just enough to see the speed with which this creature goes down a hill. Like, anybody who's done trails on hills knows that you don't go down a hill in 1 to 2 minutes. And this was according to an Instagram user. Somebody else was like, the way they move reminds me a lot of the Men in Black. And I agree with this next one. One thing I do know, I will never step foot there again. Or for me, forever. Even the Brazilian government was like, yeah, no, we're not quite sure what they are. I believe they said on Twitter, surreal what happened on Ilha do Mel. Great summer at Paran is another story, and even strange beings came to check it out. Which, alright, I don't know. I feel like it's another government cover-up, and I feel like I'm about to say that a lot today, because, hi, there hasn't really been anything else in the news. Before we talk more about aliens, how about we touch on some black hole discoveries? Well, I didn't say today was going to be all aliens. 2 teams using NASA's James Webb Space Telescope have studied the exceptionally luminous galaxy titled GN-Z11, which we're going to call it GN for short. And this thing only existed when our 13.8 billion year old universe was only about 430 million years old, so just a little one. This galaxy is one of the youngest and most distant ever observed. And also, with it being so bright, it's kind of challenging for scientists to understand why. But we're getting some secrets now, and we're peeling back the covers. The team found the first clear evidence that the galaxy is hosting a central, supermassive black hole that is rapidly accumulating matter. This finding makes this the farthest active supermassive black hole spotted to date. We've got a quote from the principal investigator, Roberto Maiolino. He said, "We found extremely dense gas that is common in the vicinity of the supermassive black holes accreting gas," which I know. Kind of redundant, but I like a direct quote. He is of the Cavendish Laboratory and the Kavli Institute of Cosmology at the University of Cambridge in the UK. Yes, that's a lot of words, I know. Using this lovely telescope, the team also found indications of ionized chemical elements typically observed near accreting supermassive black holes. So, more evidence. Also, they discovered a super powerful wind being expelled by the galaxy, and such high velocity winds are typically driven by processes associated with vigorously accreting supermassive black holes. I know, I'm saying it again and again, but it's so cool! Together, the evidence shows that GN hosts a 2 million solar mass, supermassive black hole in a very active phase of consuming matter, which is why it's so luminous. Now, come in Team 2, also led by Maiolino, used the near-infrared spectrograph, or NIRSPEC for short, to find a gaseous clump of helium in the halo surrounding GN. Now, according to experts, the fact that we don't see anything beyond helium suggests that this clump must be fairly pristine. Finding the never-before-seen population 3 stars, which are the first generation of stars formed almost entirely from hydrogen and helium, is one of the most important goals of modern astrophysics. These stars are anticipated to be very massive, very luminous, and very hot, and their expected signature is the presence of ionized helium and the absence of chemical elements heavier than helium. The formation of the first stars and galaxies marks a fundamental shift in cosmic history, during which the universe evolved from a dark and relatively simple state into the highly structured and complex environment we see today. Look, if you don't find that cool, come on! Okay, before I forget, we have another former government whistleblower that I don't think I've talked about on here before. So when Sean Kirkpatrick worked in the Pentagon as the top official overseeing the tracking of UFOs, he told his leadership that the department wasn't telling the public enough about the mysterious aircrafts or the government's efforts to investigate them. By the way, sorry, I totally forgot. Kirkpatrick served from July of 2022 until December of last year as the first ever director of the Pentagon office dedicated to investigating reports of UFOs. So Sean knows what he's talking about. He also mentioned in interviews that his former boss, Deputy Secretary Kathleen Hicks, was supportive of his efforts as UFO chief, but his attempts to engage the media always met internal resistance in the staffing process. He only did like 2 on-camera interviews during his 18 months in office. Yes, he also conducted 2 print interviews, including with Politico, which, don't worry, we'll talk about more, and a couple of off-camera media briefings, but like, not a lot. There was a very strong concern to engage in the public discourse as often as he thought they needed to. And the fact that the Pentagon leadership couldn't figure out how to get that message without concern for spillage into other areas, it kind of frustrated Sean. Now, he made those comments after Politico reached out for a response to a Defense Department Inspector General report back in January, which concluded the Pentagon's efforts to identify UFOs, and it said what? Well, they're uncoordinated, and they could have overlooked threats to the US. Also, fun little plot twist here, Eric Pahan, a Pentagon spokesperson, disputed the claim that the department declined the UFO chief's media request. I don't know, I'm smelling a cover-up. Do y'all remember the Miami Mall aliens? Good old malls, usually home to rugrats, senior walking groups, and the most annoying families you will ever encounter. Trust me, I used to work retail at a fairly large mall. I don't like going to them unless I've got my headphones on. But apparently on the first day of this 2024 year, the Miami Mall, over in Florida, might just have been home to something a little more out of this world. I know. Come on, Alexa, get to the official story. Apparently, a group of roughly 50 youths caused a riot at the Bayside Marketplace, which is an outdoor mall roughly 5 miles away from South Beach. This is all according to the Miami Police Department, by the way. They were setting off fireworks, which led to quite the panic, as a lot of folks were like, this could be worse. And the statement also came from the public information officer, Michael Vega. At this point, 4 folks were arrested. Police were dispatched for crowd control because, well, people didn't want to leave, people were panicking, they closed businesses because yikes. But here's the thing, some people spotted aliens. Now obviously the police are saying there was no aliens, no airports were closed, nothing's being withheld from the public. LOL. I don't know, folks. That's what people in power always say. I believe that statement as far as I can throw it. So in the days after the first, folks on social media launched a speculation frenzy, honing in on what they described as aliens. Some suggested that the police were actually responding to like an alien invasion, an alien visit, and not youths. Several people reviewed video of the incident circulating online and claimed they could see an alien figure in the grainy footage. And then everybody else was like, let's post a meme. To quote a post I saw on the app formerly known as Twitter, it said, 10-foot aliens creatures caught on camera, fired at inside and outside Miami Mall, media silent, cops are covering it up, saying young people were fighting with fireworks, yet all these cop cars and air traffic stops that night except for black military choppers and no media coverage. Wow, I feel like I'm getting a nasty case of deja vu. Anybody else? Clips taken from the viral video went, well, even more viral on social media, claiming that 8 to 10 foot tall alien creatures were seen. Now, the low quality clip appears to show a tall glowing figure near police vehicles. Look, I've seen videos that were less likely to be aliens turn out to be worth something in terms of being the genuine article, so I'm not dismissing it. Here's an idea, chew on this. What if every Florida man photo or meme was just an alien trying to blend in here on Earth and failing? Chew on that. And finally, for today, let's go back to last month. I believe it was during the weekend of March 9th and 10th, where Rock Springs city attorney and longtime UFO investigator Richard Beckwith spotted something kind of strange in the Wyoming sky. He called it unlike anything else he had ever seen in his career. Thankfully for us, he captured the event on camera. He was like, I've never seen a UFO before I made this recording. So we do have the footage. I'd like you folks to watch it, and to me it looks like a mix of yellowish, reddish, and orange spacecrafts that are all flying together and they're all radiating lights. They're definitely flying in a way that doesn't make any logical sense when you consider human technology for aircrafts, unless the military wants to fess up right now about any tech they haven't told us about yet, and I'm including drones in my comparison. I've seen enough of the amateur and professional models of those little devices in action to know that this isn't that. So late in the evening on March 9th, Beckwith received a call from a friend who lives near Green River, which is about 15 miles southwest of Rock Springs. He grabbed his camera, his tripod, and what he witnessed was quite a shock. He watched the object pulsate. It was moving very rapidly from side to side. Now, he isn't trying to prove the object was an alien spacecraft, he just wants an answer. Look, I know what I'm seeing. It looks like an alien spacecraft. He was like, I've received a couple of leads, but I don't have any evidence. He has requested radar records from the FAA, and he's contacted other witnesses. He's like, maybe gathering all this information is gonna help me find a reasonable explanation, or maybe determine if it truly is a UFO. So we do have a quote from him. He said, using the locations of 2 different groups of witnesses, including myself, the angle and the distance between the 2, and trigonometry, I should be able to pretty easily determine the location and get a good estimate of the size of the object. But as of the time of that quote, he had no idea what it was. Math ain't my strong suit, so I'm gonna trust him on that. Last I heard, he's still hunting. I wish him luck getting those radar records, because not gonna be easy. He's also been pleading for anybody with more information to email him, and I bet by now, he's probably regretting that. Oh, his poor inbox. When it comes to government cover-ups, nothing sets off the imaginary storm cloud over my head faster than saying allegedly, or the classic can't confirm, can't deny. It's been almost a year now that I've been doing deep dives into what they cover up, and the more I learn, the more I'm infuriated. So, question for you, what is the most shocking government secret you've ever heard? Stay tuned until the end of today for one that boggled my mind the most, and for another edition of comment section shoutouts, and let's get going before I hiss like a tea kettle. The US military once funded a flying saucer program. Yeah, you heard me right. While the public has always been fascinated with the government's investigation of UFOs, the fact that the military once funded the design of its own flying saucers hasn't been made public until about the last 10 years. The Avro Canada VZ-9 Avro car was a VTOL aircraft developed by Avro Canada as part of a secret US military project carried out in the early years of the Cold War. The Avro car intended to exploit the Coanda effect to provide lift and thrust from a single turborotor, blowing exhaust out of the rim of the disc-shaped aircraft. In the air, it would have resembled a flying saucer. Fascinating. So you're telling me the government had access to UFO tech knowledge and wanted to build their own without telling anybody? Am I shocked? Absolutely not. More like it's just something to add to the evidence files of why we really can't trust the government when it comes to stuff like this. Originally designed as a fighter-like aircraft capable of very high speeds and altitudes, the project was repeatedly scaled back over time, and the US Air Force eventually abandoned it. Development was then taken up by the US Army for a tactical combat sort of situation, a sort of high-performance helicopter to combat Soviet weapon planes. In flight testing, the Avro car proved to have unresolved thrust and stability problems that limited it to a degraded low-performance flight envelope. Subsequently, the project was completely cancelled in September of 1961. I wonder if it was a lack of Element 115, or stabilized Element 150. Throughout the history of the program, the project was referred to by a number of different names. Avro referred to the efforts as Project Y, with individual vehicles known as Spade and Omega. Project Y2 was the one funded by the US Air Force, who referred to it as WS-606A, Project 1794, and Project Silverbug. When the US Army joined the efforts, it took on its final name, Avro Car, and the designation VZ-9, part of the US Army's VTOL projects in the VZ series. The first Avro car, SN587055, after tethered testing, became the wind tunnel test model at NASA Ames, where it remained in storage from 1961 until 66, when it was donated to the National Air and Space Museum in Suitland, Maryland. The area continued gathering dust for about the next 40 years, and the museum finally scheduled it for restoration and display at their newly constructed Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center. Now the Avro car has been loaned to the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, and I think it arrived in about November of '07. After a full restoration, which included fabrication of both mixing plexiglass bubbles, it was put on display in June of '08 in the museum's Cold War Gallery. Now it has since been moved to the Presidential Aircraft Gallery, and in 2016 the Avro car was moved to the museum's Research and Development Gallery in its new fourth hangar. The thing's been shuffled around a little bit. A full-scale replica of the Avro car was prepared for the 2002 production, Avro Car, Saucer Secrets from the Past, and now resides as an exhibit at the Royal Aviation Museum of Western Canada, over in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Maybe I'll take a trip someday. Alrighty folks, raise your hands now if you've ever owned an iPod. Personally, I've owned 2 iPod Touch models in my life. The original had the metal back, I covered it with a pink gel case, and it was the first thing I bought with my babysitting money. Sadly, its battery wasn't fantastic, but I still have it and I can still power it up. It has all my old games that were discontinued from the Apple Store, still loaded, such as Surviving High School and my ultimate favorite, Cause of Death. May that game rest in peace, it was too good for this world. We got like episodes every week, it was fantastic. Okay, I promise this was all on topic. According to former Apple software engineer David Shayer, the tech company worked with the US Department of Energy on a covert project back in '05. The special iPod was allegedly supposed to act as a Geiger counter by testing radiation levels in the air, to be shared amongst people who needed to know that information. You could walk around the city, casually listening to your tunes or recording evidence of radioactivity while scanning for smuggled or stolen uranium, for instance, or evidence of a dirty explosive development program with no chance that the press or public would get wind of what was happening. This is all according to the spokesman. So pardon me, the government was casually using an iPod to randomly test for radioactive matter? Why was there a reason to test for such matter? What was going on in the air? Should I be more concerned about random kaboom events happening in my day-to-day life? Right now, I just exit a subway or elevator if I see somebody with an e-bike on, because I've heard way too many accidents with those in enclosed areas, but like, should I be more concerned about stuff in the air? Fun fact about me, I have a really bad habit of losing my belongings, because when it comes to my ADHD, out of sight, out of mind, really rings true. I'm trying to think right now what was the most devastating thing I've lost over the years. I also forget that. So I think it's just the amount of times that I've lost my transit pass and I had to replace it. I'm not going to say how many times, but it's a little silly. So something the government doesn't want you to know is that the United States and India came together for a joint mission in the 1960s that, if successful, would monitor China's nuclear development. This covert collaboration unfolded in a geopolitical chessboard where the Cold War tensions played out with nuclear undertones. The goal was to install radioactive isotope Pu-238 powered sensors, but hazardous conditions forced the team to evacuate the Himalayas before the installation was complete. When they returned, the sensors had vanished. Gone. Poof. One of the greatest magic tricks ever, if you ask me. Nobody has tracked down the plutonium devices, but locals believe they are still active in the area and are responsible for melting mountain caps that are causing massive floods. I'm sorry, I need to back up here. We know of random devices hanging out in the mountains that are actively causing global warming problems, and nobody's really doing anything to try and fix that. I'm over here mourning disposable plastic bags and straws because of how convenient they were, but we have these things causing floods and it's just a blip in an article? Come on! Okay, imagine a weapon that couldn't be traced to the attacker, so like every serial killer's dream ever. That was the idea behind the CIA's past attempt at weaponizing lightning, according to a declassified document from 1967. So in the late 60s, an unknown scientist proposed the service behind using lightning strikes as a weapon that would leave behind little or no evidence, making it difficult to identify the US government as the perpetrator. The pitch, which Forbes discovered in declassified CIA files, involved using artificial leaders of thin metal wires to cause discharges to occur when and where they desired them. The wires, a few thousandths of an inch in diameter, would unfurl from aircrafts or rockets launched into the atmosphere. Then, once lightning occurred, it would be drawn to the metal wire and strike the ground where the wire terminated. The idea seemed to be that the wire would be close enough to fry whoever the CIA wanted to assassinate with 3 million volts of electricity. If that isn't terrifying to you, it damn well should be, because that's terrifying to me. There were some interesting upsides to the weapon unique to using natural weather phenomena. For one, it was cheap, since lightning is practically free, and secondly, it left behind, there was no really traces. No casings, missile fuselages, other telltale signs of state-sponsored assassination. Sorry, just sponsored assassination. I'm thinking of all the different commercials. It makes me laugh. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the chances of being struck by lightning are only 1 in 500,000, and an observer would likely believe the target was simply a victim of bad luck. Obviously, there's a couple of problems with using lightning as a weapon. The CIA could only use it during lightning storms, and the lightning attracting wire would have to stay close enough to the target to be lethal. Everything would need to line up just right for the assassination to take place. Pardon me, that is some comic book supervillain weaponry ideology right there. While the invention turned out to be functional, the agency never fulfilled the program. Allegedly. There was nothing 1950s and 60s America loved more than dropping big nuclear devices and watching them go kaboom. From a plan to nuke Alaska, which could still happen, to actually nuking space, America wasn't shy about seeing some scenery and thinking, I'm gonna put a mushroom cloud right there. But in these early days of nuclear weaponry, we still didn't really know the effects these nuclear tests had on the human body. I've talked a lot about nuclear stuff today. It's kinda scary. We did have estimates on how much radioactive strontium produced by tests would kill a person, but the exact effects of fallout on humans and human tissue were basically unknown and unstudied. And what we did know about levels of strontium-90 worried scientists at the time. And yet, the world continued to test weapons. Project Sunshine was a series of research studies that began in 1953 to figure out the impact of radioactive fallout on the world's population. The project was initially kept secret, and only became known publicly in 1956. Commissioned jointly by the United States Atomic Energy Commission and USAF Project RAND, Sunshine sought to examine the long-term effects of nuclear radiation on the biosphere due to repeated nuclear detonations of increasing yields. With the conclusion from Project Gabriel that radioactive isotope SR90 represented the most serious threat to human health from nuclear fallout, Project Sunshine sought to measure the global dispersion of SR90 by measuring its concentration in the tissues and bones of the dead. Of particular interest? Tissue from young folks, whose developing bones have the highest propensity to accumulate SR90, and ergo, the highest susceptibility to radiation damage. It was in this environment that scientists at the Sunshine Conference, ergo the influence on the name, a conference that looked at the long-term effect of atomic weapons, argued in favor of sampling strontium fallout in humans to determine whether potentially damaging levels of it were present in different populations. So in 1955, there was a meeting of the Atomic Energy Commission, which came up with some of the specifics of the testing and urged researchers to use their own contacts to discreetly, that's the key word here, get a hold of tissue and bone samples without disclosing the nature of the research being conducted. Also, no getting the permission of the deceased. Dr. Willard Libby said in the transcript of that meeting, which was only released to the public in 1995, that it was a matter of prime importance to get them, and particularly in the young age group. So, Human samples are of prime importance, and if anybody knows how to do a good job of body snatching, they will really be serving their country. Sunshine recruited a worldwide network of agents to find recently deceased little ones and then take samples and even limbs that were collected without notification or permission. Only about 6,000 corpses from 26 bone collection sites around the world were shipped under top secret conditions to the project's headquarters in Chicago and to a satellite research office at Columbia University in New York. In one particularly grim example, a stillborn's legs were removed by researchers in the UK, and the mother was told she couldn't dress the stillborn for the funeral, to conceal from her that the legs had been taken for the project. Just when you think government agencies and places like NASA are starting to be more forthcoming with their knowledge, something new hits the internet that has folks like me sighing from deja vu. You might think you know everything at this point, but I promise you that NASA still has some deep dark secrets left to reveal. Question for y'all, what info drop about NASA has shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments, and let's see if I found anything you don't know yet in today's edition. How about we kick off today with a discovery that personally shocked me the most, and that's Operation Paperclip. Alright, goofy word time. Yule Tube Land doesn't really like a lot of the words that have to do with the mass extinction event of the 1930s and 40s, so bear with me while I talk about the Yahtzees and more. The Third Reich had built up a huge bank of scientists, engineers, and technicians over the course of that big, bad event. And after the conflict ended, the US wanted to use some of their knowledge for their own gain. Because why not? Gotta hoard all the knowledge you can. Thus came Operation Paperclip, a plan to rehouse hundreds, if not thousands, of former Yahtzee scientists in the US and put them to work on various projects. And one such project was the early days of NASA. Conducted by the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, it was largely carried out by special agents of the US Army's Counterintelligence Corps. One of the people brought over during this operation was Kurt DeBoos, a former V-2 rocket scientist. He was transferred over to NASA in 1960, and in just 2 years was named the first ever director of its Launch Operations Center. From there, he oversaw hundreds of rocket launches and played a pivotal role in the preparations for the moon landings. Now, at the time, President Truman spent 16 months before making his decision to approve Operation Paperclip, and several of the Paperclip scientists were later investigated because of their links with the Yahtzee party. I wonder why. Only one Paperclip scientist, George Rickey, was formally tried for any crime, and none of the Paperclip scientists were found guilty. And we're talking not found guilty in the US or in Germany. Rickey was returned to Germany in 1947 to stand at the Dora trial, where he was acquitted. We got another person in 1951, weeks after his US arrival. Walter Schreiber was linked by the Boston Globe to human experiments conducted by Kurt Blohm at Ravensbrück, and to be safe, he's like, I'm just gonna head over to Argentina. But he did that with the aid of the US military. In 1984, Arthur Rudolph, under perceived threat of prosecution relating to his connection as operations director for the V-2 missile production to the use of forced labor from Mittelbau-Dora at the Mittelwerk, renounced his US citizenship and headed back to West Germany, which they're like, here, have citizenship. For 50 years, from 1963 to 2013, the Strughold Award, which was named after Hubertus Strughold, the father of space medicine, for his central role in developing innovations like the spacesuit and space life support systems, was the most prestigious award from the Space Medicine Association, which was a member organization of the Aerospace Medical Association. Well, what happened in 2013? On October 1st, in the aftermath of a Wall Street Journal article published in 2012, which highlighted somebody's connection to human experiments, the Space Medicine Association's executive committee was like, we're gonna retire this award, we'll start a new one. So, after all that, Operation Paperclip remains a dark mark against America's post-bad things activities, and NASA was a part of it. It's an icky secret, one that doesn't get any easier to hear, no matter how much you talk about it. So, conspiracy theorists have accused NASA of staging the moon landing since the day the footage aired on live TV. So, fast forward to 2006, when NASA admitted that nobody could find the original video recordings of the 1969 landing. Suspicions that it was all just one big hoax, they flamed up. One would think that something like that footage would have been a massive priority to store and preserve. One Russian official even weighed in, calling for an investigation, and the agency's story remains firm. According to them, in 2004, an archive in Sydney confirmed that it had located the missing videos, and then it was like, that's false. But then that kind of set in motion a global search for the missing footage. With its recovery, NASA wanted to produce sharper images of the landing than those were originally broadcasted, which were produced by a TV camera pointed at a monitor. But most folks at NASA now believe the tapes are long gone. Why? Budget cuts. Yeah, Those aren't just a modern thing, folks. It was standard procedure throughout the 60s and 70s to reuse tape reels after a certain number of years in storage. The originals were likely part of a batch of up to 200,000 tapes that were magnetically erased. The footage is just out there in the ether, right next to the old episodes of Doctor Who that have gone missing over time. So what has been saved throughout the years? Well, in 1972, astronaut John Young developed a major case of gas while standing on the moon. He had accidentally left his microphone on, and NASA recorded his discussion on what all the fruit was doing to his intestines. This same astronaut was also recorded while eating a corned beef sandwich he had smuggled aboard a separate mission, which, when shared with his co-pilot, began to crumble and fly around everywhere, threatening to get behind the electrical panels and short-circuit wiring. Because, yeah, that's important to archive. A messy sandwich. So much more important than the first man on the moon. Yes, we still have the video that's been reused and reshown over the years through many different mediums, but to have the original tape be gone? That's just sad. Considering how many astronauts are experts in engineering, biology, mathematics, physical science, mechanics, piloting, and really whatever else might be pertinent to a mission, it's unsurprising that they understand a little thing called supply and demand. In the months leading up to the legendary Apollo 11 launch, Neil Armstrong and his crew signed hundreds of autographs, but most notably were the covers, or envelopes that were signed and postmarked on important dates. Now, when NASA fell short on the astronauts' life insurance policy, these guys were smart. They sent signed covers to their friends and families so that they could be sold off in the event of a disaster. Their actions were warranted as well, by the way, because reports say that NASA already had a plan in place to sever communication with Apollo 11 if the astronauts became stranded on the moon. Nixon even had a pre-written speech. Also, even as recent as 2003, NASA had no special insurance for its astronauts. When the Challenger mission exploded mid-flight, the families of the deceased, well, they got the standard federal life insurance payout. Nothing more. So after the Yahtzee news, this was the most head-scratching story for me today. Astronauts are out here risking their lives for knowledge that will better the human population as a whole, and they don't even have special insurance for that? I was speaking with a friend who works in crew setup and teardown for events the other day, and for folks who work as riggers, they have to provide their own super expensive insurance before they can even be considered for a job. And if they get hurt in any way on said job, even minimally, that insurance price is going up. And while that's dangerous in its own right, it's not space travel dangerous, where you could die before you even make it to space if things go wrong. I don't know, I think astronauts need insurance. The good news is that with space tourism consistently teased on the horizon, some private companies are ready to cover your anti-gravity adventure. Personally, I have less than zero interest in risking my life in space, but hey, let me know in the comments if you'd ever be interested in that. If anyone has ever read the book SEX on the Moon by Ben Mesrick, then you already know the tale of Thad Roberts and his plan to do something very interesting with a bunch of stolen moon rocks. And for folks like myself who didn't know until recently, buckle up for something I couldn't make up even if I tried. Thad was a high-flying NASA co-op with dreams of obtaining multiple degrees and becoming an astronaut. And he also had dreams of stealing some of NASA's most prized possessions. With help from a team of accomplices, because you can't steal from NASA alone, he stole 101 grams of moon rocks, valued at a little simple $20 million from NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. For reference, that's slightly less than half a cup. And that's $20 million. That's more money than I'll see in my lifetime. And if that wasn't bad enough, he also stole some dinosaur bones from his university. Now, as somebody who knows a thing or two about dinosaurs, I tried finding out what dino the bones were from, but I got nothing. So if you know, let me know. So what did he do with the rocks? Well, he laid them out on his bed and proceeded to get down and dirty with his girlfriend on top of them. Hence the whole SCX on the moon thing. The young man and his fellow thieves were caught in an FBI sting because they tried to sell the rocks. Yeah, I know, stupid. And they were sentenced to time in jail. Just when I think I've seen it all around here, I still get surprised. Boinking? On space rocks? Ow? Oh, and before I move on, because of that, he contaminated the rocks, making them virtually useless to the scientific community. He and his buddies also destroyed 3 decades worth of handwritten research notes by a NASA scientist that had been locked in the same safe. All for some silly shenanigans and coitus. I'm without words. Perhaps one of the reasons why the Space Shuttle program was canceled was because people didn't want to have to keep clearing alligators off of the runway every time a shuttle came in to land. Yeah, no, seriously, apparently the Kennedy Space Center is full of the scaly snappers. The center is located on Merritt Island, which is a small mass of land off of the east coast of Florida that isn't technically an island, but who's keeping track? Despite being the most famous landmark on the island, the NASA complex isn't the only thing hanging out there. There's the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, which is home to over 1,000 species of plants and animals. We're talking sea turtles, manatees, bobcats, bald eagles, you name it, they have it. And of course, they've got gators. So NASA does have the ability to restrict human access to the site should they need it, but how do you go about telling, a gator how to do that? According to the agency, interactions between their staff and the gators is rare, but that's obviously what they're gonna say. It's a PR statement. Look, gators were one thing I was very glad I didn't see when I took a vacation to Florida last year, and I'd like to keep it that way. And turns out it's pretty dangerous living conditions for the creepy crocs. NASA has identified one toxic groundwater site at the Kennedy Space Center that exceeds federal standards for the same chemicals that people in the area fear contributed to increased cancer risk. Heck, even a paper published in the Environmental Toxicology Journal found the redness fluids of alligators caught between 2012 and 2015 at the Space Center tested at the highest levels of toxic fluorinated chemicals ever measured in the species. That's bad. In 5th place, we have Planet 9. So in April of 2016, the New York Post tweeted that a newly discovered planet could destroy Earth as soon as that month. Now, obviously we're all still here, unless we've been replaced by AI or holograms without my knowledge. Honestly, 2016 was the year I transitioned from high school to university, and 'twas a very chaotic year for me. The newspaper was referring to Planet 9, a theoretical planet at the edge of the solar system. Based on earlier considerations, this hypothetical super-Earth-sized planet would have had a predicted mass of 5 to 10 times that of the Earth, an elongated orbit 400 to 800 times as far from the Sun as the Earth. So expert astronomers have suggested that Planet 9 may be the core of a giant planet that was ejected from its original orbit by Jupiter during the genesis of the solar system, captured from another star, once a rogue planet, or that it formed on a distant orbit and was pulled into an eccentric orbit by a passing star. An accompanying video also claimed that the new planet would be throwing all sorts of asteroids and comets at Earth, which would supposedly end up pummeling our planet. Astronomers are actively looking for it to explain motions of some objects in the icy Kuiper Belt, a vast region of icy objects beyond Neptune. I tried to find a pronunciation for that word, couldn't find it, so if I'm wrong, let me know. And while sky surveys such as Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer, otherwise known as WISE, and Pan-STARRS did not detect Planet 9, they have not ruled out the existence of a Neptune-diameter object in the outer solar system. When the planet is actually found, it will pose no threat to us, according to the California Institute of Technology's Mike Brown, who is one of the original backers of the Planet 9 theory. While it doesn't have an official moniker right now, it will likely be a name chosen from Roman or Greek mythology. Let me know in the comments what you think it should be, officially named. I personally think Dolos, the spirit of trickery, since NASA seems to want to keep this planet their little secret. In 4th place, we have the McMinnville UFO sighting. Widely regarded by UFOologists to have produced the most important photographs of a UFO, the McMinnville sighting became famous at the height of the 1950s UFO craze. Paul Trent captured the images on camera after his wife, Evelyn, spotted a slow-moving metal disc while feeding the rabbits on their farm. The images went on to be printed in Life magazine. The pair maintained that they had seen a genuine UFO until their deaths, repeating the tale for the Oregonian in 1997, year I was born. Now, before someone starts asking what this has to do with NASA, it absolutely has everything to do with them. They're the ones who cover up UFO sightings and proof. And if you remember, my last point, I'm pretty sure they have a hand in covering up government proof as well. Now, to elaborate on this event, Evelyn Trent started yelling for her husband at about 7:45 p.m. on the evening of May 11th, 1950. She was feeding the rabbits in the yard of the couple's Dayton farm when she saw what she described as a good-sized parachute canopy without the strings. Only silver, bright, mixed with bronze. She later elaborated that it was as pretty as anything she ever saw. Evelyn ran into the house, found her husband and their camera, and the duo raced back into the yard. Paul Trent also spotted what he described as a round, shiny, wingless object hovering in the sky. The 43-year-old farmer managed to take 2 photographs before the flying object disappeared into the evening mist. Fun fact, they're the most famous photos ever to come out of Yamhill County. The McMinnville Telephone Register and the Oregonian published the images in June of 1950, a month after Paul Trent took them. So the delay was because he had to finish off the roll before getting the images developed. Such a struggle sometimes. Life magazine followed the Oregon newspapers, offering its national audience, a gander at the unidentified flying object. Soon, because of this, a U.S. Air Force investigator came to the Trent farm, and while explaining the event to the officer, Paul said that the object was coming in towards them and seemed to be tipped up a little bit. He emphasized it was very bright, almost silvery, and made no noise. The investigator had heard such stories before, since once again, this was the golden age of UFO sightings. But while most alien craft tales are easily debunked after being discovered to be weather balloons or private planes or obvious hoaxes, that wasn't the case with the Trent's photos. In 1967, the Air Force commissioned prominent nuclear physicist Edward U. Condon to lead an exhaustive UFO study. The 950-page report, exhaustive, titled Scientific Study of Unidentified Flying Objects, easily dismissed most of the reported sightings, but it stated at least one, showing a disc-shaped object in flight over Oregon, is classed as difficult to explain in a conventional way. The study determined that the photos were genuine and the Trents were truthful. It specifically declared that this is one of the few UFO reports in which all all factors investigated from genetic to psychological and physical appear to be consistent with the assertion that an extraordinary flying object, silvery and metallic dish-shaped, tens of meters in diameter, and evidently something, flew within sight of two credible witnesses. So explain to me why NASA has never released a statement on this? They're keeping pretty dang quiet, and so is everyone else. What can I say? Secrets make me cranky. In third place, we have life on Venus. So back in the 1970s and 1980s, the Soviet Union sent several uncrewed missions to study the planet Venus. 10 of these Venera probes landed on the surface of the planet and were able to transmit data and images for a few minutes before succumbing to the planet's extreme atmosphere. In 2012, the Russian news service RIA Novosti reported that Leonid, I cannot say his last name but it starts with a K, a scientist who worked on the Venera missions, suggested that the photographs showed living objects moving around on the planet's surface. According to Leonid, certain objects resembled a disk, a black flap, and a scorpion, which emerge, fluctuate, and disappear, referring to their changing location on photographs and traces on the ground. The editors of Solar System Research published an editorial comment and a number of commentary articles from other scientists in their September of 2012 publication of Issue 5, Volume 46 of the journal, to be specific. The issue also includes a second article from Leonid, in which he claims to identify several other life forms and speculates regarding the apparent rich diversity of life around the landing site. It's a lot more rare to get alien spottings from folks outside of the US, and I feel like NASA is just out there covering them up. So I'm glad this one made it to the interwebs, even though folks have tried to explain it away. In second place, we have a government whistleblower. Alrighty. Before I get into it, I'd like to elaborate on how credible this story is. So, the whistleblower in question, David Charles Grush, is a veteran of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, or NGA, and the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO for short, where he served as a representative to the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force from 2019 to 2021. From late 2021 to July of 2022, he was the NGA co-lead for UAP analysis and its representative to the task force led by the Department of the Navy, under the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. Whew. At the NGO, David served as a Senior Intelligence Capabilities Integration Officer, cleared at the Top Secret Compartment Information level. From 2016 to 2021, he served with the National Reconnaissance Office as Senior Intelligence Officer and led the production of the NRO Director's Daily Briefing. He was a GS-15 civilian, the military equivalent of a colonel, and has numerous awards and decorations for his participation in covert and clandestine operations to advance American security. I don't know about y'all, but I think this is our most credible witness yet. So David said the recoveries of partial fragments through and up to intact vehicles have been made for decades through present day by the government, its allies, and defense contractors. He said that craft recovery operations are ongoing at various levels of activity, and that individuals on these UAP programs have approached him in his official capacity and disclosed their concerns regarding a multitude of wrongdoings, such as illegal contracting against the federal acquisitions regulations, and other criminality and the suppression of information across a qualified industrial base and academia. Associates who vouched for David said his information was highly sensitive, providing evidence that materials from objects of non-human origin are in the possession of highly secret black government programs. Wow. Multiple government witnesses to boot. Although locations, program names, and other specific data remain classified, the Inspector General and Intelligence Committee staff were provided with these details. Analysis has determined that the objects retrieved are of non-human origin based on the vehicle morphologies and material science testing and the possession of unique atomic arrangements and radiological signatures. The investigation was centered on extensive interviews with high-level intelligence officials, some of whom are directly involved with the program, and they corroborated his information. David is certain that the information has been illegally withheld from Congress to intentionally thwart legitimate congressional oversight of the UAP program. He has also filed a complaint alleging that he suffered illegal retaliation for his confidential disclosures. In his statements, David claimed that UFO legacy programs have, long been concealed within multiple agencies, nesting UAP activities in conventional secret access programs, without appropriate reporting to various oversight authorities. According to the unclassified complaint, in July of 2021, he had confidentially provided classified information to the Department of Defense Inspector General concerning the withholding of UAP-related information from Congress. Christopher Mellon, who spent nearly 20 years in the U.S. intelligence community and served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, has worked with Congress for years on unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP for short. He has mentioned that a number of well-placed current and former officials have shared detailed information with him, including the location where a craft was abandoned and recovered. He claims the reason more folks haven't come forward is due to a lack of trust in the leadership of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, established by Congress. The assumption that the United States alone has bullied the other nations into maintaining the secrecy for nearly a century continues to uphold hold as the primary consensus amongst the public at large. So you're telling me that credible US government officials have been adamant that the government is hiding things? Sounds right to me. In first place, we have Viking lander aliens. A woman who claims to be a former NASA employee claims to have seen evidence of the most monumental cover-up in space history back in 1979, when she saw two human figures in spacesuits walk calmly towards the Viking lander across the Martian surface. Going by Jackie, she claimed to have been working for NASA, handling downlink telemetry from the lander, which was the first vehicle to send back images of Mars' surface, when she saw two people walking on the surface. She and 6 colleagues were watching the Viking rover, bustling about all over various screens when she spotted 2 men in spacesuits, which were not the bulky suits that they normally used at the time, but looked safe. They came over the horizon, walking, right to the Viking Explorer. Naturally, some folks have claimed that the humans may have just been there to polish the lander's solar panels, but that seems a little odd, considering if there were, just humans there, they could have just filled the lander with petrol instead, or take the photographs themselves. Jackie claims that while the folks were maintaining the equipment, their video feed was suddenly cut off without explanation, and when they rushed upstairs for answers, the door leading to the room controlling the equipment was locked, with paper taped over every crevice to avoid anything being seen. Hello? Suspicious red flag alert. If you don't understand how scary cover-ups are and why this is ranked so highly, then I worry about how blasé you are. Other theorists claim there were secret landings on Mars in the 60s, and the Apollo landings were actually a cover-up for wider exploration of the solar system. Former CIA pilot John Lear claims that NASA landed on Mars in 1966, and that humans adapted to breathe the thin Martian atmosphere. Nigel Watson, author of the Haynes UFO Investigations Manual, said that these accounts of secret space missions seem to be growing in number, and remind him of the infamous Project Serpo. Yep, I'll sidetrack. In November 2005, a contact called Anonymous, who said they worked for the US Defense Intelligence Agency, started sending information about an extraordinary alien exchange program called Project Serpo. Basing his claims on a 3,000-page document written in the late 1970s, he boldly claimed that 6 aliens were recovered from the Roswell crash. Claims that aliens living and or dead were recovered from the Roswell crash are nothing new. But in this case, it was stated that an alien survivor from the crash, called EBE-1, helped to organize 12 specially trained people to visit his home planet, Serpo, in the Zeta Reticuli solar system. This mission occurred in 1965, and they remained there until 1978. During their stay, 2 of them died, 2 remained on the planet, and the rest, after returning to Earth, have died because of the high levels of radiation they were exposed to. I'm just saying, NASA has admitted that there are many things out there that we do not know about, and that UFOs are indeed real. So, what other secrets are they hiding? I swear between them and the US government, I wish I could file a million Freedom of Information pieces.
And for our number 5, we have time travel. Back in 1960, the CIA actually got associated with the time travel mission of Mars. But let's backtrack a bit, but not too far back into the land of dinosaurs, but rather the conception of time travel. According to NASA, time travel is possible, but not in the way we may think. In fact, NASA explains we all travel in time, but approximately at the same speed, which is 1 second per second. Plus, the space agency has also discussed how the different types of time travel seen in movies or even books could be real. Scientists have conducted experiments that show the faster you travel, the slower you experience time. And this was ultimately driven by one experiment which looked at 2 clocks. One stayed on Earth and the other flew in an airplane. Hopefully it got first class. Well, when they compared the 2 clocks, they found that the one in the fast-moving plane was actually slightly behind the clock on the ground, which means it was traveling slightly slower in time than 1 second per second. And NASA's conclusion stated, yes, time travel is indeed a real thing, but it's not quite what you've probably seen in movies. Before adding under certain conditions, it is possible to experience time passing at a different rate than 1 second per second. And there are important reasons why we need to understand this real-world form of time travel. Although we have slightly indicated the speed of time can be altered, we haven't gotten to a point where we could jump a few weeks ahead, at least for now. But NASA isn't the only one who has spoken about time traveling, because 3 years before the company was even founded, Albert Einstein passed away. And this theoretical physicist had his own theory of time travel. He believed if a person were to travel at the speed of light, time on Earth would appear to slow down and ultimately result in people on Earth aging faster than the person who was traveling at the speed of light. He also believed time is an illusion that moves relative to an observer, and that time and space are linked together, as the universe has a speed limit, as nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, which is 168,000 miles per second. And for number 4, we have reptilian guidance. Many people don't know that NASA had scientists that were a part of the group of very controversial people, especially during World War II in Germany, if you can already guess what I'm hinting at. You know, they had a leader with a straight mustache. Well, anyways, that group of people taught the people of Antarctica about their objective to establish a mystery base for the space programs in that continent. A mysterious space program was established by that group from the highest northern areas of the Earth. The reptile alien allowed the group to learn their secret technologies so they could conduct space missions. American Navy intelligence officer William Tompkins told that an extraterrestrial reptile species has unfriended the group about setting up space programs, and apparently the outsider alien races directed the group to start their work secretly in Antarctica, and apparently the group's actions were controlled by these exterior races. And after World War II, the controversial group's researchers took away all the research papers from the US government in order to carry out their own space missions independently. Plus, NASA has even captured photos from Mars which resemble reptilian-like fossils. What do you think? And at number 3, we have remote viewing of Jupiter. This doesn't mean they just looked into a telescope and saw Jupiter, but rather remote viewing is a concept which suggests that some people can gather information about things or places far away even if they can't see them directly. It implies that by using extrasensory prescription, also known as ESP, or even psychic abilities to access details beyond normal human senses. Although mainstream science has not considered or proven remote viewing as a proven or reliable phenomenon, many scientists view it as a pseudoscience without solid evidence. So, well, years ago, the CIA was associated with secret trials and projects that related to the remote survey. They nominated researchers from Stanford University to assist in the project, and one of the general population in the program was Ingo Swann. Anyways, Ingo Douglas Swann was born in 1933 and was a psychic and proposed a study to Russell Targ and Harold E. Puthoff to view the planet Jupiter through remote viewing. And both Russell and Harold were scientists who had doubts about the result because of the impossibility of verification. But one evening in 1973, Douglas decided to use his abilities to see Jupiter, and according to subsequent reports, it took him around 3.5 minutes. He claimed to have seen bands of crystal in Jupiter's atmosphere, just like the rings on Saturn. And a few years later, in 1977, NASA launched Voyager 1 to fly by Jupiter and Saturn, and it confirmed the existence of Jupiter's rings, which Ingo claimed to have seen before it was even proven. And this caused more RV experiments to take place as Russell and Keith Hooray used RV to predict silver futures in an attempt to raise funds for their research, and the results were very successful. In fact, they earned $120,000 US and a front page article in the Wall Street Journal. And their forecasts were all correct for 9 weeks in a row on changes in silver future markets. Russell conducted another RV as he worked with Pat Price, who was a psychic and retired police commissioner, to identify and locate those who took 19-year-old newspaper Harris Patricia Hearst. And Pat was able to identify the ringleader in the police logbook, and he was able to identify the type and location of the car used, which ultimately allowed cops to find it within minutes. And for number 2, we have X-38B. Sounds like something Elon Musk would name his kid, but instead it is a secret aircraft which most of its projects are kept hidden from the public. It first started flying secret missions in 2010 and has been doing it ever since. Although not much is known about the purpose of this aircraft, what we do know is that it looks a lot like NASA's iconic Space Shuttle, but is much smaller. It is only 29 feet long, or 8.8 meters, and has a wingspan of 15 feet, or 4.6 meters. Although the X-37 program started in 1999 with NASA, which initially planned to develop 2 separate vehicles, one as an approach and landing test vehicle, and the other as an orbital vehicle. NASA ultimately transferred the X-37 development to the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, also known as the DARPA, in 2004. And at this point, it became a classified program. The Air Force's X-37B fact sheet stated that this spaceplane was designed to spend 270 days or even more in orbit at a time, and there was no sign of the reason for their multiple and lengthy missions, and the NSA has been quite quiet about this. In the Russian press, they have conveyed that the X-38B is a piece of a mission to eradicate satellites from space for America. Laura Grigo, who is a senior researcher of the Global Security Program, expressed the central goal of X-37B is so much secret that it must be a secret for a reason, but she doesn't understand or see any clear reasons for the secrecy, but does acknowledge that the nature of these missions is intentionally kept undisclosed. Plus, fun fact, you can actually see it from the ground, and by going into space.com's satellite tracker, you're able to see where X-37B is overhead during a mission. Although you can see it, it usually looks like a star moving across the sky. So next time you make a wish to a shooting star you see, make sure it's not X-38B near you. And in our number 1 spot, we have an ancient alien moon base. In April of 2007, a recording began on YouTube which was pushing for a mission to show the moon from August of 1976. And the user who posted this was William Routledge, who claimed other mystery space missions and was an author. William expressed that specifically his group reached the moon in secret back in 1976 and even claimed they found an ancient outer base there. Not only that, but William also claimed to have an encounter with a female humanoid, which was referred to as Mona Lisa, and even described it as it was in a condition of suspended movement, which is neither alive or, well, deceased. According to William, the outer exterior of this humanoid is described as weighing 75 kilograms or 165 pounds and being around 5'6" in height. This being apparently also has 5 fingers and 1 thumb, which highlighted the alien's mathematical structure and how it might be based on 12 rather than the human system based on 10. The team planned to transfer this being to Earth, but regardless, still isn't a confirmed claim. So Mona Lisa the alien, if you're out there, consider subscribing to the channel to learn more about yourself.